Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Stone and members. I'd like to first start by accepting the amendments that are outlined on page 7 of the analysis. These amendments serve to clarify that the bill does not apply to cities or other buildings which share the name of the city in which they're situated. And 2, they clarify that the bill only applies to names of elected leaders and senior military officers of the Confederacy. I want to also point out that I received another letter of support that came in late. I'd like to add it to the record. It's the Los Angeles Urban Policy Roundtable. I have copies for the members of the committee. Our public buildings should be named for people of great accomplishment who are role models of high morals and principles. Unfortunately, some public places in California still honor Confederate leaders who attempted to break America in two to protect their right to enslave people. I don't want to erase their names from our history books. I just don't want our children looking up to people who fought to preserve a system that treated human beings as cattle. This is the basis for my legislation, SB539, the Frederick Douglass Liberty Act, which seeks to remove the names of elected and military leaders of the Confederacy from all public places, including parks, buildings, roadways, and schools. Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave who became a truly historic figure in his activism against slavery. The murders of 9 black churchgoers in South Carolina a few weeks ago stunned all of us. I asked whether there were any constructive steps we can undertake in California to discourage any embrace of the racist values of the Confederacy. I was surprised to learn that we had a couple schools here in California named for Confederate General Robert E. Lee. I saw the names on our streets that have been named for Confederate leaders, and had also heard from the Daughters of the Confederacy that they had placed memorial plaques in honor of Confederate President Jefferson Davis in California. My legislation is not an answer to systemic racism that does permeate American society in far too many places. It does nothing to fund programs to improve racial tolerance and understanding. It simply shines a light on some overlooked examples here in California of where we are celebrating traitorous leaders, even those who led what would be considered honorable lives before or after the Civil War. I'm pleased to have with me the Mayor of Pittsburgh, Pete Longmire, who would like to say a few words in support of the bill.
Thank you. Your first witness, please. There's a button in by the mic. There you go.
Good morning, Honorable Chair, distinguished members. My name is Pete Longmire. I am the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. I am also a retired police officer from the same city, Pittsburgh, California. As we all know, there was a tragic killing of 9 parishioners in southern and South Carolina, and which is a painful reminder to me on many different levels, both social and law enforcement. When I learned that there was a schools named after Confederate generals, that brought a bitter taste in my mouth and was really, really painful. In California, the namings of roads and structures are generally reserved for people who provide noble service to the various communities. My community and other communities have had to withstand the celebration of these Confederate leaders throughout the South for many generations to come. This should not occur in the great state of California. My family roots hail from the first 7 of the 11 Confederate states: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. I believe that it is essential that we stand up and put a stop to the commemorating those who fought so hard to retain the institution of oppression and slavery. If you fail to act on this bill, our citizens will be continued to live with and face the horrible wallpapers of the past. I can't say enough about this bill. As I said, from a personal and a law enforcement perspective, I've had to deal with similar issues that involve the Confederate flag as a law enforcement officer. So I urge that we move this bill forward. Thank you all for your time and your attention.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Seeing none, is there any opposition? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the committee. Senator, I think you have a very laudable goal, But as we've figured out, as we've worked through this, and I think the mayor of Fort Bragg would agree, it's a complex question as we seek to untangle the history and the symbols that represent hatred in our community, and symbols and individuals that persist with that notion of racism and hatred. So I appreciate that you brought this forward, and the recommended motion is do pass as amended, and this bill will then go to appropriations. Mr. Gallagher.
I guess one of the concerns is that why not leave this to local jurisdictions who, if they find that there is a public building or a street name that is offensive to the community sensibilities, can then go and change that at the local level? Why are we doing this at the state level?
That's a good question, and certainly share your philosophical views about local control. And I guess I would say this. We've given them, 50, 60, 70 years to work on that, and yet we still see these examples in our state. So I think we've given them that opportunity to do the right thing locally, and I do support that as a fundamental goal. But in this case, it hasn't happened. So I think that a little nudge from us is probably what's necessary to deal with the remainders of these examples, these poor examples that we do see in our state.
And then I guess the other concern I have is the potential slippery slope here. I think you brought it up. I mean, Robert E. Lee, probably the best example of a complex figure. Somebody who was the general of the Confederacy, but later after the Civil War, declared in several instances that he abhorred slavery, that he was glad that it was ended. A complex figure. So, we have several other instances of those. One that comes to mind is Earl Warren, governor of the state of California, but played a pretty pivotal role in Japanese internment. Do we remove his name from all public buildings because of his role in that? That's my concern, is that we're going down this road. What else might we do because of the acts of what a person did during a career and during a time, a context that we all agree now in modern society is completely reprehensible and abhorrent to our sensibilities, but doesn't necessarily take into account the whole of that person.
Assemblyman, I think that you can probably look to many people who have committed great horrors in the world and find some examples where you might say they were a good family man. They took care of their staff in a kind way. They were generous to charity. And so in each of these cases, I think we have to understand the magnitude of what we're analyzing and examining. And in the case of the Confederate War, look at what was at stake. The future of our country, the ability of states to enslave people against their will. And I think at that level, and given the actual effects of that conflict, 650,000 Americans killed. I'm not going to excuse bad behavior in other circumstances with anything that I say, but I do think that in this case, the consequences were high, the questions of morality and human dignity were great, and in that context and in that consequence, I think certainly we want that understanding to be in our history books and displayed in our museums, those choices, those consequences, those people. But now we're talking about when you walk into a school and you look up and you see who's on the marquee, who you're going to honor, who you're going to put in a place of respect in our state. And I think that in this case for me, and with this legislation, I think it justifies the state preemption and the state declaration of what we think was right and wrong, and how we want to see ourselves today as Californians.
Mr. Lejo.
Thank you. I always believe that place names and public places and symbols are very important. But I think that a few weeks ago, when we heard the news of what happened with these 9 murdered community members and churchgoers, I think we were all outraged and upset that anyone would be murdered and targeted for the color of their skin. But then, and here we were living in 2015, but was more appalling was that there was state-sanctioned efforts to keep that Confederate battle flag flying above the state capitol. It was unbelievable that that was still taking place in 2015. And anyone who looks back at that history when that Confederate flag was put up, I believe in 1962, was in defiance to the Civil Rights Movement, in defiance to integration, in defiance to the implementation of Brown versus Board of Education. But yet decades later, those symbols of racism were still flying above a state capitol. Unbelievable, and unbelievable for, but an important lesson for our young people that those symbols matter, those place names matter. But yet we were critical of South Carolina, but in California we have to look within and said, what are we also doing? Where are those Confederate names and symbols that are still up within our own state? And it's never too late to do the right thing and make those changes. Frederick Douglass himself coined that phrase, without struggle, there's no progress. And here we are in 2015, able to look at these important names and make some changes that are long overdue. These were vestiges and symbols of the past, a period that was very painful in American history, but there's no reason why in this day and age, this state legislature cannot act to do the right thing for our future generations. And I'm very proud to co-author and support this bill.
Mr. Wagner.
Well, I will begin by sharing my friend from Watsonville's absolute outrage, as did everybody in this room, I am sure, to the horrific murders in over a couple of weeks ago. It's a non sequitur to say, and therefore we need to take Robert E. Lee's name off of our schools. And the author, to his credit, recognizes that this bill does not bring about racial harmony and does not do a whole lot other than perhaps send a message. I do want to push back, though, a little bit, because I don't think Mr. Gallagher's question was answered. What you're doing here is more than, I'll use your phrase, a little nudge. This is a law. This isn't a resolution saying it's the sense of the legislature that no school should be named for Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis or some such leader of the Confederacy. That isn't what this is. This is more than a nudge. This is the heavy hand of the state saying to the locals, you shall do it our way. And I think that the idea that all of a sudden, for whatever reasons, a horrific killing in some other state has got our attention, I think it's also gotten the attention of the locals. And if we really did have respect for them, we would step back and say, okay, now that you're getting the wind, the feel of the winds around the country, what are you going to do about it, and give them an opportunity, perhaps with a little nudge, a resolution rather than a dictate from the state. And the slippery slope remains out there and completely unaddressed. Franklin Roosevelt signed the internment order. Earl Warren said, yeah, that's constitutional. What about Hugo Black, who was on the Supreme Court for many years, was a champion of the First Amendment, and got his start in politics as a member of the KKK? Does his name next come off of all of the buildings? Maybe it should. I don't know. But we need to recognize we are on a bit of a slippery slope. What do you do about John Tyler? John Tyler was a president of the United States and then got elected to Congress, the Congress of the Confederacy. Is he a sufficiently high leader? Does John Tyler's name, a president of the United States, now come off of all of these buildings? Where schools or streets or whatever they're on, I don't know where we stop. I'm not sure that this bill goes too far that it's not supportable, but at its heart, there's a sense here that perhaps a sentiment here that perhaps a legislature ought tread lightly and carefully.
Thank you.
So there.
Ms. Weber.
I want to thank you, Senator, for bringing this bill forward, and I'm proud to be one of the co-authors on this bill, as well as the author of another bill that we'll see today. I think what happens in conversations like this, and having spent 40 years in development and writing and curriculum and teaching in Africana studies, comes obviously the ambivalence that many folks have around the Civil War itself, without recognition that those who participated in the Civil War were traitors. And we sometimes don't identify that because they were relatives and friends and aunts and uncles and cousins of people in the North. But yet they were people who were trying to destroy the country, which is a lot different than maybe a person who signs an order or who participates in some activity but still believes in the Union itself. In any other place probably in the world, they would be seen as traitors, as they should be seen here. We would not hopefully name a school after Benedict Arnold because we believe he was a traitor, and he doesn't have in our minds the rights to have anything named after him that would be a symbol of excellence for our children and our families to participate in and to recognize. It's rather hard oftentimes, even African Americans have raised this issue for many, many years about the naming of things after members of the Confederacy, as well as the flag, the Confederate flag, and what it symbolized to so many. And yet others see it as a part of their heritage, which means a part of the right of states' rights. As we talk about local control, that's basically states' rights in the federal sense. And the fact that many did not want to give up the right to have control in their states as to who would be free and who would not be free. And so this is an ongoing challenge, an ongoing conversation that we have to have about our own ambivalence, about who the people were who participated in the Confederacy, who participated in the Civil War, whose goal was to divide the nation between the North and the South and to form two separate countries. And all of those things that were part of a piece of our history that even found its way in terms of the ambivalence expressed of those after the war, when we did see, once again, the U.S. government having some ambivalence about what the Civil War meant, who their relatives were, retreating from the rights and commitments they had made to those, developing separate but equal laws, and we can go on and on and on with the retrenchment of the initial commitment to end slavery and to accept African Americans as full participants in this country. So the history is fairly clear about it. The question is, what role do we play in history? And for me, I think it is important that we do look at this and understand that the Civil War period was not one that we should ever celebrate. It's not one that we should learn from it. It's not one that our children should actually see as a great part of American history, other than the victory to retain the Union and to eliminate slavery should be the part that we look at. But we should see this as we would see and look at people like Adolf Hitler. I doubt seriously if we'd put those symbols up, if we would celebrate that individual for what he meant to the world. And surely when I look at the Civil War, it's not something that I take with great pride. It's not something that I look at with great honor. As an American, I look at it as traitors to the country, to the mission, to the goals and objective as we were trying to become a more perfect union. And surely the retrenchment from that commitment afterwards is one, again, talks about a 100-year struggle for civil rights in this country from the beginning of the Emancipation Proclamation to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So it goes on, but I think in this time, in this place, the symbols have once again come up, and we've seen it in the most ugly way in terms of the recent killing of the 9. We see it in that ugly way that's there, but it's also been wrapped in so many other things in this country. So I think in California, we take pride in the fact that we were not the South in our minds, that we were not a part of the Civil War, that we can have a much more intellectual conversation about it, but it is real for those who have been a part of it, who live it, and I thank you for bringing this forward. It is going to be something that will be a challenge. It's a challenge in San Diego, as we have a Robert E. Lee and Ms. Gonzalez, who's trying to get that name removed from a school. It'll be a challenge to try to re-educate our population and our communities, but it's most important for the symbolism and for the messages and the lessons that our children will learn. And I respectfully thank you for that, and I hope my colleagues will give an aye vote to this matter.
Thank you. I'm still looking for a motion.
I move the bill.
Moved by Ms. Weber, seconded by Mr. Alejo. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this forward. And I think on the issue, which is a valid one, about what the state does with respect to local jurisdictions, but I think the history shows that we've become numb to some of the symbols and some of the individuals, who they were, what they represented. And the more time that passes, that that numbness leads to an inaction, and I think if nothing else, this bill brings up a heightened awareness and will hopefully ask Californians to look a little bit deeper about what those symbols, what those individuals mean. And with that, I'll ask you to close.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I share your thoughts fully, and I ask the committee respectfully for an aye vote.
Thank you. So that motion is due pass as amended to appropriations. Call the roll, please.
Stone?
Aye.
Stone, aye. Wagner? Wagner, aye. Alejo? Alejo, aye. Chow? Chu? Chu, aye. Gallagher? Gallagher, no. Garcia? Garcia, aye. Weber?
Aye.
Weber, aye. Mainshine? Mainshine, aye. Thurman?
That bill is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.